Well, in today's Wall Street Journal, there is new opposition to UN Ambassador Susan Rice's possible nomination to the position of Secretary of State. Ms. Rice had a rough week trying to mend fences on Capitol Hill, unsuccessfully as it turns out, it seems, over her statements in the immediate aftermath of the terror attack that killed 4 Americans in Benghazi on 9/11. But today, former Attorney General Michael Mukasey offers a list of reasons why Ambassador Rice may not be qualified for the job, and they go well beyond Benghazi. Joining me now, Michael Mukasey, former U.S. Attorney General. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me.
So I think our viewers know the Benghazi story by now, and you also have similar objections to those we've heard raised by some Republican senators. But what else? I mean, you didn't hear a lot about Susan Rice in the first term of President Obama. What are your objections to her?
Well, part of it has to do with the fact that you didn't hear a lot about her, which means that a whole lot didn't get done at the United Nations. But beyond that, when Benjamin Netanyahu gave his speech describing, it was a very significant speech as a head of state, describing why,
2 months ago.
Yeah, why the survival of his country depends on stopping Iran from weaponizing its stock of uranium. She was absent.
Here he is at the United Nations in September making the case. Our viewers may remember this moment.
I do.
So she didn't show up?
Correct.
Why not?
She was off at a luncheon meeting of some
Well, maybe she was busy.
This is a head of state, an ally of the United States, talking about a highly significant issue. It seems to me that the lunch, if that's what it was, or the meeting, if that's what it was, could have waited.
You feel like it was a snub?
It's not a question of how I feel. I think it was perceived as a snub, and it was the fact that she wasn't there was commented on. And I think any diplomat with a pulse would know that it would be commented on.
You also have an issue with our participation in the UN Human Rights Council, which has been very anti-Israel. And her defense is, look, we do it because it would have been even worse if America hadn't been there to defend Israel as this Israel bashing went on.
Yeah, part of the problem with that statement is that it's indefensible. She made that statement 2 weeks after the Human Rights Council finished a session in which it passed more Israel bashing resolutions than it had at any session before. So if her presence is doing any good, or our presence is doing any good, it's not perceptible.
What about Syria? Because Syria is such a mess. We've lost our focus on it in the recent weeks and months with the election. But, I mean, they are involved in a civil war now. And it was said that Bashar Assad was about to go. Well, he hasn't gone. And, you know, thousands upon thousands of children are dying in Syria, many being tortured in front of their families. And the United States isn't doing that much. We tried to do something at the United Nations. It failed.
It failed, large measure because the Chinese and the Russians, with whom we were supposed to have hit the reset button, remember that? Haven't allowed anything to get done. And this person, who was supposed to be a superb diplomat, hasn't managed to get that off square one. All that's happened is the United Nations has sent an observer, and the Arab League has sent an observer, and what they're observing is what you described.
Do you think another UN ambassador could have gotten something done? I mean, you think if we had a John Bolton, for example, or somebody else in there, they could have convinced Russia to go against Syria or China? Do you think so?
Short answer is, I don't know. But I think it pays to ask the questions. This person is being put forward as Secretary of State. What have you done in your post to warrant that? She was also, by the way, absent at the initial vote on the attempt to break the Israeli blockade that was launched out of Turkey. When the UN convened an emergency session, again, at the first session, she was nowhere to be found. That's why I said there were other things that could be brought forward at a hearing like that.
I want to talk to you, though, about whether this is Secretary Rice or Ambassador Rice's, problem, or whether this is a President Obama problem. I mean, who sets the policy? And I also want to ask you about the other possible choice, which is John Kerry. So her approach at the United Nations, do we pin that on her, or do we pin that on her boss, President Obama?
Look, to the extent that it's policy, we pin it on her boss, because the president sets policies, no doubt about that. And the UN Secretary, the UN Ambassador does not. But I think all of this ought to be aired at a hearing so we can find out what it is that the policy was, what it is that was effective, what it is that was ineffective. Now, so far as showing up at either the vote on the blockade breaking or Netanyahu's speech, I can't believe that the president told her not to show up, and if that's the case, then somebody ought to find out about it.
What about the notion that the president is entitled to have the folks he wants in these positions? These are folks who represent him, who advise him, and that there should be some deference to the president in, you know, even if you don't like Ms. Rice, he likes her, and he's entitled to have her counsel.
Absolutely, but that's what hearings are about. They're about finding out a person's qualifications. They're about finding out what it is that we're getting, because she's representing not only the president, she's representing the United States of America as Secretary of State and as UN Ambassador, for that matter. So, although the president may get his choice, if she's representing all of us, we ought to find out what she's about.
There's a reason we have the confirmation process. Finally, John Kerry is the other name we hear often mentioned about the other possible main candidate for Secretary of State. Your thoughts on him?
Well, this is a guy who threw away his war medals, called his fellow soldiers in Vietnam war criminals, and then during a debate in 2004 said the United States should not use force internationally without getting the approval of everybody else. That's not somebody I want to see as our Secretary of State.
Who do you like?
Hard to think. Carl Levin, who's head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, is a very stable, experienced man.
We'll leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
General, great to see you. All the best, sir.